The Last of Us Part 2 is one of my favorite gaming experiences of the decade, and while its gameplay, dynamic systems, and world building are all exceptional, the story, for how moving it is fundamentally flawed, which sucks because ideologically, this is great, and with a bit of shuffling and rearranging, this could have gone from a game whose story lit the internet on fire to one that we unequivocally look back on as one of the GOATs. With the HBO series in full swing, it felt like the perfect time to revisit the games and see what changes I would implement to make the overall experience better. We're mostly going to be looking at the story, but the biggest change I'm going to propose would directly impact gameplay, so we'll touch on that a bit too. Obviously, there will be spoilers. If you're someone that hasn't played these games and don't want to know what may or may not happen for them or the HBO series, come back and watch this probably after Season 3 or after you finish both games. Finally, my credentials are that I played the game twice and have a 17-page Google Doc detailing my thoughts on pretty much everything. That's literally it. Let's get into it. The Last of Us Part 2's biggest misstep is unequivocally with its pacing, the main culprit being Joel's untimely death. Now look, I went into this game completely blind. I somehow managed to avoid all the spoilers that were circulating across the internet, and I still knew Joel wasn't going to make it out of this game. But I don't think anyone expected him to die an hour in. If you go back and look at the trailers for this game, in particular the end of the release date trailer, they heavily hint that this is going to be a tag team revenge mission with Ellie taking the helm and Joel taking the backseat, effectively swapping the roles from the previous game.
What the hell are you doing here?
You think I'd let you do this on your own?
What the hell are you doing here?
I think I'd let you do this on your own.
This was a pretty clever way to lower our guard, which makes his unexpected death hit that much harder, and while I commend the game for being bold enough to kill off its main character, I can't help but think of the missed opportunities here and how much of a slap in the face this is for people that waited 7 years to see these two in action again. So that leads us to the big change that I would make to fix this game's pacing. Abby should kill Joel at the end of this game, not the start of it. And I mean literally the last shot of the game being this. Now, we're obviously going to have to change some gameplay and story elements to achieve this, and we'll get there, but I want to talk about the other big fumble with the story first, because the changes that I'm going to propose will fix both of these problems. That second big issue being how they handle Abby. The Last of Us Part 2 makes a really bold decision in cutting off right at the climax of the story and then making you do an entire second playthrough as the person who up to that point was the villain. That is something I've never seen another game do, and looking back now, I can appreciate how creative this choice was, especially since we're big Team Abby around these parts, but in the moment, this left almost everyone at best confused and at worst infuriated. I mean, we spent 10 to 12 hours hunting this girl down, and not only did we not get to kill her, we had to spend another 10 to 12 hours playing as her, going through her side of the story. And it would be one thing if this was just a normal perspective shift, but they try so hard to humanize Abby and make her likable, almost like they knew most people weren't gonna like the fact that we had to play as her. On a second playthrough, it sort of feels like all of the not so cool stuff Ellie does is just a precursor to Abby's playthrough to make us think maybe this girl isn't so bad. You will kill a lot of puppies playing as Ellie, and what do you do almost immediately after swapping to Abby?
Who's the best boy? Yeah. Get the ball.
This doesn't work because at the time of the perspective shift, most of us have already made up our minds that we don't like Abby. It's near impossible to bring us around to her side when our first impression of her is her killing the guy that we spent the entire last game playing as. So let's look at some structural changes to remedy this. For the first quarter of the game, give us that Ellie and Joel duo that everyone wanted. The fact that almost all of the time they spend together in this game is in the form of flashbacks is criminal. Again, we waited 7 years to watch one of the two main characters die immediately. We needed more time to see these two together, and how the time since we'd last seen them has changed their dynamic for better and worse. I actually really like the idea that Ellie and Joel aren't on the best terms during the game, and this would have been really cool to experience through character dialogue during gameplay. Maybe if a stalker jumps on Ellie, Joel could save her and have a snarky remark about how she needs to be more careful. And as Joel, Ellie could call him an old ass man after saving him from an infected attack. Now that brings us to the big gameplay change I would make. Your companions are a really big part of The Last of Us, helping in combat and pointing you in the right direction if you get lost. I also found them to offer a type of solace during the more unsettling moments of the game. By far, the scariest moments of The Last of Us are the moments where you don't have a companion. I think instead of having a static protagonist and a companion character piloted by AI, it would have been so cool if we could dynamically swap between our two party members, with AI controlling the one that you aren't using until you swap back. Now this doesn't mean that we always have a companion. When the story calls for it, the party could split up, and I think it would be cool to let us choose which character we want to solo as. I'm envisioning something like in Gears of War, where sometimes the game will offer you two different paths, and both offer slightly different gameplay. This promotes a bit of replayability as you can go back and play through the other character's perspective on a second playthrough. I really love the differences between Ellie and Abby's playstyles, with Ellie being more focused on stealth and Abby boasting a more loud, direct confrontation arsenal. So I think we should absolutely keep this in play, but have Joel be the hard hitter. This would allow players to easily swap between stealth and hard combat depending on how they want to tackle an encounter, and really skilled players could even set up traps between the two. You could lure enemies in with Joel and have Ellie pick them off from the shadows, or use Ellie to kite enemies in larger groups away from Joel to make his direct combat easier. It's worth mentioning that I don't want Joel to not be able to stealth kill, or for Ellie to get one-tapped if she has to have a hard combat encounter. I want it to essentially be how the live game already is, where both players can play however you want, but they have obvious strengths that gear them more towards a specific playstyle. I think the option to swap between the two styles on the fly makes the differences between the builds more noticeable and opens up combat encounters with more flexibility and freedom. I didn't really notice that Ellie and Abby were supposed to have different fighting styles until my second playthrough, where I played on a higher difficulty and had to get a bit more creative with combat. Now on to fixing Abby. Again, the main problem with how she's implemented is the bad first impression we get of her. So how do we fix this? Remember how I said for the first quarter of the game that we should play as Ellie and Joel? Well, something needs to happen to separate them right at that quarter mark, and this is where we introduce Abby. And for the rest of the game, have her be our second playable character. For this to work, it's really important that she seems just like a random person that we ran into and tags along for a seemingly shared goal. It could even be something as simple as going in the same direction. So do not do what the show did and give away her motive as soon as we see her. Over the remainder of the game is where we get to know Abby and hopefully start to like her. This is the natural course of things as we slowly start to learn about her backstory, with her dad being killed, though keep the fact that Joel killed him a secret, her vertigo, and as the two of them fight through the game together. We need to be completely blindsided when we finally meet up with Joel and Abby kills him. So she may need to be a little sneaky or conniving, but this should only be apparent on a second playthrough. Surely Ellie would say Joel's name at some point, but only give subtle hints that he means something to Abby too. Maybe slight facial changes the first few times he comes up. In terms of gameplay, she would fill the same role as Joel did in the first quarter and as she currently does in the live game. This way you can keep both playstyles. I imagine there to be some fun banter with weapon pickups, where if you're playing as Ellie and find a weapon that's meant for Abby, there could be a little moment where she hands the gun off to her and says something like, "I think this one is more your style." Or maybe the character even wants the gun, but the other one sneaks up and takes it, knowing it'll be better in their hands. Again, we need Abby to be likable, so there should be plenty of fun banter between the two. Have Abby save Ellie a couple times, and if you really want to fuck with the audience, maybe add a bit of romantic tension between the two. Now, we don't need another boat scene, but a bit of will they won't they adds depth and complexity to the relationship and would likely add to the audience's affection for Abby. The final hurdle would be reconnecting Ellie and Abby with Joel and introducing Abby's friends. This could be something as simple as Ellie and Joel establishing a meeting place before they set out on their journey, or while they're being separated. Ellie and Abby could get to the location and find Joel there waiting. Joel runs up to Ellie to hug her, and the two of them have their moment before Ellie introduces Abby. I really like the way both the show and game depict Abby meeting Joel, where she's visibly uncomfortable but knows that she can't take action right in that moment, so I would want to take a similar route here. Remember, this Abby's cunning. Doesn't matter how buff or not buff she is, she knows that she can't take the two of them on at once, and given the time that she'd have spent with Ellie, I'm sure that she wouldn't even want to hurt her. So Abby simply shakes Joel's hand, maybe with a slight facial twinge, but one that could easily be viewed as discomfort from meeting someone new, and propose that the group meet up with her friends, where Joel and Ellie could restock before going their separate ways. Sound familiar? From there, roughly the last hour of the game could play out like the first hour of the live game. The three of them meet up with Abby's group, she drops the facade, a couple of her friends incapacitate Ellie, and Abby goes on the PGA tour. Because of their friendship in this version, I think I like the route the show took with Dina, where they maybe put Ellie to sleep rather than just weigh her down and make her watch. But maybe she wakes up a little bit earlier than expected and sees Abby finish Joel off, with the final shot of the game being a somewhat blurred view of Joel's battered face from the perspective of a drugged Ellie. And that's where we can make this into a trilogy. The third game could essentially play out like this one does, but without the pacing issues. We currently don't know if Last of Us Part 3 is even going to be a thing, and while I feel the epilogue does a good job of wrapping everything up, only having 2 things in a series feels a bit off. Schoolhouse Rock taught us that 3 is the magic number. I love a lot of the characters introduced in this game, namely Dina, Yara, and Lev, and while the changes I propose would mean that they likely aren't in the second game much, if at all, I still want them to have their time in the sun, and there isn't much I would change about any of them. I do think it would be better to start the game off as Abby, then swapping to Ellie for the second half. The way I view it, making us play as Abby after building up our hatred for her was a deliberate choice to confuse the player, and maybe make us realize that the path of familiarity or that our first take on things isn't always necessarily right. Making us play as her right after she kills Joel still accomplishes this, but I think it's even more confusing now because we'd previously grown to like Abby before the act of betrayal. Swapping the order in which we play as them helps with pacing because even though we've now taken steps to make Abby more endearing, some people are just not gonna care. All of that work is gonna go out the window when she kills Joel for a portion of the audience, and swapping to Ellie, who is more familiar and favored by the majority of the player base, purely based on the time we've spent with her, likely feels like a breath of fresh air regardless of where you stand in the overall story. In this version, I really like the idea of letting us choose who we want to side with and play as in the final confrontation, but I think it's important that neither girl dies. To me, this isn't a story about revenge, but about how the cycle of hatred feeds into itself and is never ending unless someone chooses to break it. I know I said earlier that I'm Team Abby, but this really feels like an everybody's the asshole situation, and it doesn't feel right to have one character kill the other. By the end of the game, I was just exhausted and wanted the 2 of them to move on, and I want to keep that same energy here. Whoever you choose to play as should win the fight and be in a position to kill the other person, but ultimately choose to let them go, like Ellie did in the live game. There would need to be an additional epilogue for players that choose to side with Abby that also shows what all she's lost throughout the journey. For Ellie, it was Joel, her new family with Dina and JJ, and the ability to play guitar. For Abby, it would be her dad, entire friend group, and Yara. The melancholic ending puts you in a mindset to simply wonder, was this all worth it? And I think it's important to keep that ending for the series. So those are the changes I would make to fix the pacing problems with The Last of Us Part 2. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Did I miss anything? Is there a particular change that you would have implemented? I'm curious to know. Anyway, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.